Welcome to Conversations with Friends. And I actually have known of Robin Hill, whom you're about to meet, but I really had no idea how much he has accomplished. I knew he's accomplished a lot as a photographer of architecture, art, design over the years. I mean, if you're interested in architecture, design, art in South Florida and throughout the world, you will probably have been to one of his shows over the years. And I just want to, first of all, introduce Robin Hill.
Thank you.
And his wonderful photography work. But I just wanted to read a few of the places where his work has been exhibited. So we're not trying to impress you, but this is impressive. It really is. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, he's exhibited. The Coral Gables Museum in South Florida, the Guggenheim Museum in both New York and Bilbao, the University of Miami School of Architecture. So it just goes on and on and on. I could go on probably for the next half hour, giving you an idea of where his work has been. And as I understand it, Robin, first of all, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you.
And as I understand it, I mean, your passion really did start with, and it still is there, with architecture, right? So it's not exactly where you started. We'll get into that later. But were you always in love with buildings and design and
all
that good stuff? Yeah.
No, I wasn't actually. I sort of had an architectural epiphany. And that was in the late 90s. And a friend of mine, Terry D'Amico, she founded the term which is known as MIMO, which means Miami Modern. And that was all about the architecture that was built between 1945 and 1971 here in Miami. And before that, I was really a travel photographer. But she invited me to a meeting of a group of people called the Urban Arts Committee. And they chose 3 photographers to document these buildings from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s here in Miami Beach. And before that, I had not really had a great interest in architecture, but it was always there in the background. And but what Terry did is she introduced me to this style of architecture called mid-century modern architecture. And we went around Miami Beach together and she showed me all the buildings. And she said, oh, this is the Fontainebleau by Maurice Lapidus. And right next door is the Eden Rock. That's also by Maurice Lapidus. That was built the year after in 1955. But up the road is a building by Norman Giller. That one was in 1954. That one was by Gilbert Fane in 1947. This was by Igor Polovitsky in 1951. And for some reason, all of this information just went into me. And I said, wow, this is like knowing when a song was written. So you could say, Bridge Over Troubled Water, Paul Simon, 1971, right? And it was the same thing with the building. I said, there's this thing between a music, a song, and a building. And you can say, okay, well, that's when that building was created, and that's who the architect was. But that wasn't the only thing. What really captured me was the aesthetic of this mid-century modern architecture, which was way outside my comfort zone. You know, I was really into classical architecture from Greece and from Rome and all of these beautiful old structures, like the one you can see behind me, which is Castle Rigg Stone Circle in the Lake District, which is, you know, at least 4,500 years old.
Look at that.
But what I found is that the modern architecture was speaking to the world of today and how we live our lives today and how shelter is still the cornerstone of our existence. And I went on this tour with Terry and I just fell in love with architecture. And as of that moment, it became, you know, that became the main focus of my work in photography.
And that was it. And I'm so amazed to hear you talk about this because I grew up on Miami Beach and kind of lived with the buildings that you're talking about on Miami Beach. And it was much later in my life, actually in my TV career at WLRN, where I started to learn about MIMO, right? I mean, I used to say Nemo, but I know it's MIMO. And I began to develop this appreciation for it as an architectural or art form even, you know? And I don't even think, excuse me, I don't even think that people realized it until there was this movement to
Right,
save these buildings, right?
That's right, yeah.
How important and significant these buildings, Miami Beach. And I did get to interview Norman Giller much later in life. His granddaughter wrote the book.
That's
so
right.
I have a sense of that. And when I hear of those buildings having left us, I actually feel sad.
Yes,
Not much makes me sad. You know, I mean, I feel touched by things in life, but that, I mean, because I sometimes long for that life when I think about how, not that you can go back, but I think about how Miami was in the past, and it does give you a sense of that past. So I'm just so moved that this was kind of the beginning of your, you know, you went from travel, you were actually doing travel photography.
That's correct, yeah.
Focusing on the architecture, yeah.
So I have a friend, Diane Smart, who used to be the head of the Broward Trust for Historic Preservation, and she used to say this about preservation, that we are the custodians of our cultural history. And I love that sentence, and that really had a lot of resonance with me because, you know, you can see the photograph behind me, right? We are the custodians of the Castle Rig Stone Circle there. And we've managed to save that for 4,500, 5,000 years, who knows, maybe even older. And we connect with that history of ourselves as a species. And it's very sad to see our history being wiped away, sometimes purely for profit, you know? But our cultural history is more important than a developer making money. But it's always an uphill battle because the preservationists, we don't have a lot of cashola generally, but developers do. And sometimes it's a bit of a David and Goliath thing. So my approach to preservation was that this was all about awareness and getting the message out there to the public that some of these buildings, not all of them, but some of these buildings are really worth preserving. That includes buildings like the Fontainebleau and the Eden Rock. Even though they are modern buildings from the 1950s, and to a lot of eyes, they may not appear certainly as maybe they're attractive buildings as such, but they are paradigm shifting buildings that kind of ushered in a whole new way of looking at architecture. So they're culturally and historically significant, as well as, you know, I would say art is subjective, but those buildings in and of themselves are worth preserving because they're interesting, you know?
They're interesting, and like you say, they are our history. If we wipe out buildings, which, you know, do reflect the way people lived and the way people thought, we're sort of wiping out our past, aren't we? You know, like almost not seeing our past. So I'm always so happy, you know, to hear of people that are helping to preserve buildings. And you certainly have done that because of your work. Why don't we take a look at some of your work right now, so people can get an idea of
okay. Let's see what we got first.
The exceptional work that you do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is a very famous modern house. It was designed by the architect Philip Johnson in 1949, and it's in New Canaan, Connecticut, and it's called the Glass House for obvious reasons. He wasn't the first architect to come up with this idea, though. The first architect was his mentor, a very well-known architect, a German by the name of Mies Van Der Rohe. And Mies Van Der Rohe was one of the founders of what is known as the Bauhaus in Germany in the 1920s, but Mies left Germany when Hitler came into power. And he came over here to the United States, and he set up shop in Chicago. And he was a very huge influence on 20th century architecture. And Philip Johnson became close with Mies and actually managed to build his house, which is this one here, in 1949, 2 years before Mies Van Der Rohe built his glass house, which is the Farnsworth House, which is in Plano near Chicago. But this photograph is interesting because you can see the transparency here and the connection to nature. So when you're inside the glass house here, the only thing that you can see is nature, and the glass works as the wallpaper of the house. And it's constantly shifting and changing throughout the 4 seasons. It was a weekend house. You can't imagine spending all of your time in this 1,800 square foot little glass cube. But Philip was very clever. And what he did is, now you can't see this in the photograph, but across from the glass house is a place called the brick house, which is where he housed all the air conditioning, all the heating that he needed to do to supply power to the glass house. So this is set on a 47-acre estate in New Canaan, Connecticut, and now it is owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I've been shooting there for the last 17 years. Yeah.
Well, that's got to be an interesting experience to just be able to be there. And to me, again, that's part of looking at a building like this. It's or a house like this. You know, I love that oneness with nature, being able to connect with nature. So it's, again, these are messages through architecture, aren't
Yes.
they? You know, showing us a different way to live, or and also, aren't a lot of the new houses today, you know, this whole new look, I mean, kind of more like that.
Yes, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. I mean, this architecture is the apogee of, you know, the very height of modernism. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful, and in the hands of a pretty good architect like Philip Johnson, and certainly in the hands of Mies Van Der Rohe, these places are really spectacular. However, many of the modern houses that are being built today, especially here in Miami, some of them are not up to the
quality.
And so you will find that in Miami, you know, the climate here takes an awful toll on the buildings, especially when you put stucco on the outside of concrete block. And so after a few years, you'll see a brand new building here in Miami. After 15 or 20 years, they're starting to look, you know, not so great. But it's a difficult environment to build in, and you really have to spend your time getting it right. And sometimes down here in South Florida, you know, in the construction business, there's a few corners that are cut. Could we say that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Florida's known for that. South Florida is,
it shows. So, but there is, modernism really started in the late, we can go.
Yeah.
It's not modernism, is it?
No, this is
not this photograph.
Maybe
we
should
move along.
Right?
Should we move along to the sacred geometry piece here?
Sure.
Okay. So this is a project that I did in 2009. And in 2009, unusually, there were 13 full moons in that calendar year. And I created one of these moon circles every full moon in the year of 2009. This was the one in July. And I took the dimensions here directly from Stonehenge. So if you see the inner circle here, that's exactly 10.015 feet. Now that is exactly 1/10 of the inner chamber at Stonehenge, which in sacred geometry terms, Stonehenge is the apogee of ancient technology, would you say, along with the Great Pyramid in Cheops. And in terms of scale and proportion, this is directly related to Stonehenge, which is also directly related to the Great Pyramid at Cheops, which in turn is related in scale and proportion to the diameter of the Earth. So that's
pretty extraordinary. Now, my question is now you did this work.
Yeah.
Somebody actually commissioned you to do this?
No, personal project.
Or this was your own project? Oh,
yes, that's right.
What an amazing project.
It takes about 4 to 5 hours to create this.
And then you photograph it.
Yes, it's a 30-second exposure, and the camera's on a tripod. And what I've done is I've run around as fast as I can with a little flashlight to highlight the medicine wheel here, which is what it is. It's basically facing east at the moment, direct east, and so the camera is west, and then there's north and there's south. And we use this as to meditate in and to create manifestation. So
Robin, this leads us to something we really want to talk about.
Okay.
Your spiritual awakening.
Okay.
That happened 30-something years ago, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't think I had any idea about it until I started, looking at some information about you, reading about you and everything. So what happened to you then?
Well, this is an interesting story. So if you could, it's 1989. And at that time, I was a photographer on the cruise ship. So I was actually a photographer on a ship called the Sovereign of the Seas. And at the time, that was the world's largest cruise ship. But on a Tuesday, it would call into Puerto Rico. I went to Puerto Rico 157 times on a Tuesday. And St. Thomas the next day, 157 times on a Wednesday.
Oh my goodness.
On one of those Tuesdays, sometimes we would get time off and you go and explore Old San Juan, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Astonishingly atmospheric and evocative place. Puerto Rico is called the Enchanted Isle with good reason. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was in tune with spirit, thankfully. But at the time, I was an atheist. I'd just come out of British education from the 1970s, and it was all very fact-based way of looking at life. But we were walking up Calle San Francisco, one of the streets in Puerto Rico, in Old San Juan, and there's these old cobblestone streets, and we're walking up this hill, and on the left-hand side are these two beautiful gates. And I said, Amanda, let's go in there and go and explore. And it turns out that this was the University of Puerto Rico's Divinity School. And it opens up into this beautiful courtyard, which is 100 feet by 100 feet by 100 feet, beautiful scale and proportion. And we start walking around, and in the far right-hand corner, there is a gate, but it's not an ordinary kind of gate. In fact, it's sort of really got vines over it, and it's really old. And I said, Amanda, let's go in there. I wonder what's behind this door. So we push open the gate, and behind the door is this secret garden. But it is a garden that is unkept. It has not been looked after for many years. But it's about 40 yards long, 15 yards wide. And we go in, and there's a very quiet atmosphere in there. But to the right is an old dead tree. And for some reason, I'm attracted to this tree. And I go and stand under the tree. And it's just a kind of a quiet moment. We're both doing our own thing. And then the next thing, and this has never happened to me before or since, is that I realize that my feet have become magnetized to the ground and I can't move. And I'm like, in my boots, my Dr. Mines I used to wear. I can't move my feet. And then this silence came over me. And I heard this like real little whisper. And it said, resist not. I said, okay, I don't know what that means. I'm just going to kind of go with it. And the next thing, my arms are coming up like this to the side here, not of my accord. I'm not asking them to do this. They're just like spontaneously coming up. Like there's this energy that's coming up through the earth into me.
Through you, yeah.
The next thing that happens is that I see the water vapor has all become like diamonds in the air. And then the next thing is that the vegetation is super saturated, really, and everything is just pulsating with life. And I'm stone cold sober. This is not an LSD trip or anything like that. And this experience continues and becomes more and more intense for about 45 minutes or so, something like that. At the end of this experience, I've changed. I can't say how it happened or why it happened, or I didn't ask for it to happen. It was purely spontaneous. But as of that moment when I came out of it, my whole perspective had shifted. And if you were a photographer, you would say, well, instead of having a telephoto lens, suddenly I had a wide angle lens. And suddenly I was a much kinder person. Where did that come from? It's like, oh, there's this kind of sense of kindness going on.
Oh.
Sense of compassion and this sense of being connected. and I didn't understand what had happened to me at all. But fortunately, at the time, my closest friend, who's still my closest friend, his name is Roscoe Sinan, and he at that time was an astrologer. And but he was a very serious meditator, and he learned knowledge from Maharaji, who was you've probably heard of him.
Yeah, I have heard of Maharaji. Yeah,
Maharaji. Yeah, and so my friend Roscoe did my birth chart for me, which was a very intriguing experience. And he showed me my strengths and weaknesses, and he said, you know, this is what the chart is. But the main lesson here, Robin, is that when you connect with divine will, the chart isn't so important. But, you know, that's kind of the print that you were born with, but you don't necessarily have to follow that. You can work on your weaknesses and you can keep putting your strengths forward, but just understand that it's divine will that's calling the shots here, and just tune into that. And I'm going to show you how to tune into that. So he taught me how to meditate.
And that was it, isn't it?
Yeah, but yes, he taught me how to meditate, but it wasn't the knowledge that he gave me. You know, that was a very private thing further down the road. And knowledge is not something that I practice anymore, but he taught me the basics of meditation. And I took that on board, and I've been using that ever since.
I love hearing this story because I embrace this idea, that suddenly we're going along in life, caught up in our work and our families and our life, and then something happens, that something happens, changes everything,
Yeah.
And I think I assume there are people that just ignore it and go on, but you didn't, you were open.
Yeah. The reason I know that it was real, Meredith, is because it's still as prevalent today inside of me as it was then. Now, if it had gone away after 6 months or so, I would have said, okay, that was like a fantasy experience. But the reason I know that it was real is that it's still here today. It just resonates through the years.
Beautiful. Well, I'm wondering how has this affected or influenced the way you work? Different now?
Yes, I think it really brought to the forefront that it wasn't the photography that mattered, it was the relationships. So a lot of my clients, I have been working with them for a really long time, and I love many of my clients are amazing architects and designers, brilliant people. And what I really like about working with architects is that they're always looking for a solution to a problem, right? And photography works like that too. You got to find a solution to a problem. And as a metaphor for life, I just think that's so beautiful, that instead of like trying to find a problem and give other people your problems, you're constantly looking for a solution. Why not? Hey, let's work that way, shall we? So that's kind of, it really provided me with a foundation of philosophy to live my life by,
I in a way, I feel that's what the spiritual journey is about. It does give you a different way, right? To live your life. I like how you say that, to live your life. Everything shifts, everything changes, not all at once, right? It didn't happen. Now you studied too. I think you were studying healing, right?
Well, the journey has been long. Long. 33, 34 years now. But the basic cornerstone of it has always remained the same. That compassion, kindness, tolerance, understanding, unconditional love, all of these things come first. They don't come second. It's primal. And it being primal led me into a path towards shamanism later in my journey. But at the same time as learning the shamanism, which was a very powerful construct in terms of understanding nature, it's not the only influence, and I'm very drawn to the Eastern philosophy of being instead of doing. Put it that way. Makes sense. I'm using language.
Absolutely. I think we need more being. I know. I tell myself every day, just slow down.
Yeah.
Spend more time meditating. Just get into that zone.
Yeah.
And it's very healing, right? It's very inspiring, uplifting, all of those things. And I don't know, when I Well, I want to move to a few pictures.
Yeah.
Just let's show a few kind of quickly because we have a few minutes left and they're so interesting, your pictures, that I hate to miss them. Yeah.
So this is called the Genesis series. This was, unfortunately, my friend who is photographed here, James Laparo, who was a brilliant artist. We were very different people, but that's why it worked. This is his gesture. You see this circle here? It's like an ellipse, and you'll see this gesture throughout his work. But this photograph, we worked on it together, and we dug a sculpture into the sand, which was 40 feet long and 6 feet deep, which we then set on fire, because this whole series is about earth, fire, air, and water coming together. And so at the bottom of the photograph there, you can see the smoke from the fire, and then the tripod is set up in front of that, and it's on a 30-second exposure, and Jim had this little pointed flashlight. That's how he was able to make that while the shutter was open. But this is not in Photoshop. This is just one photograph. So while the shutter was open, the summer storm was going on in the background, and the lightning went off while the shutter was open. And it just so happened that Jim's hand there, you can see it as a ghost, is actually touching the lightning at its source. So this became our interpretation of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, where you know, this is happening. So
mesmerizing. It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is Castlereagh Stone Circle. It's in the English Lake District. And in the whole of the British Isles, there are 900 of these stone circles and what are known as henge monuments. But this one is probably the most atmospheric. And again, this is like a long time exposure. So the camera's on a tripod, and I've waited till about 10 o'clock at night because this is taken in December, where it gets dark really late in Northern England. And basically these stones here are just lit up with a flashlight that I'm running around with. And this particular stone circle has many secrets to sacred geometry in it. And you can probably see I'm right on its east-west axis there, and the gate there at the end, the two stones at the end, those two, for me anyway, my interpretation of it was that was the entryway into another world. Now, whether that was built as the intention by our ancestors or not, I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. But what I do know is that if you go here with a quiet mind, you'll find your heart really opening up to nature, and that's a really beautiful thing.
I love what you're saying, a quiet mind. And in a way that's, yeah. Look at this.
Oh, this is my friend. My friend Taylor Clifton passed away in 1996, unfortunately from AIDS. But there was a very, very famous photographer in New York called Robert Mapplethorpe, who many people may have heard of. And Taylor was one of his favorite models. And after Mapplethorpe passed away, Taylor moved down here to Miami and set up his own dance troupe. And I said to him one day, "Hey, Taylor, I'd really like to take your photograph. You know, at the moment I'm listening to Miles Davis, kind of blue album, you know." And I said, "You know, I've really learned something from this album, that he's really improvising in the moment. So we're going to go to the beach and we're just going to totally improvise." And this was one of the photographs that I took that day. Actually, and down the road, this photograph was used for a non-profit run by my friend Dennis Edwards called Dance for Life. And we used this photograph to raise money for dancers with AIDS.
These photos are just, I don't know, they each one, it has a story. You have a story for everything, but it's, to me, what I'm feeling is an experience by seeing these.
That's lovely, thank you. So for many years in Miami here, there was a dance company called Maximum Dance Company. And it was run by David Palmer, who's on the left here, and a gentleman called Yanis Pekaris, who is a magnificent dancer. And I went to Yanis's last performance at the Gussman Center downtown, and I had never seen anything like it. It completely blew me away. And after that, I said, "Yanis, you know, what can I do? I want to be able to try and work with you guys." He says, "Well, maybe you can come and take some photographs for us." And that started a 2 or 3 year experience of me going to photograph their dance. And this photograph was about a year and a half or so into it. But one thing that happened is, you see the lady on the right, her name is Andrea. And I bumped into the PR person for Maximum Dance about 10 years later after this photograph was taken. And I showed him this picture and he says, "Robin, I know that that's Andrea because of the shape of her calf muscle." You know, those kind of little details, you know, you can't get from any other source. But this for me, the word here is mellifluous, which means a smooth flow of energy. You know, if you can live your life like this, then hey, you're onto something.
What a message that
Oh.
is. And I think we're just about out of time, but
Okay.
show a couple of more.
Out of time. So this is the old Carillon, built in 1957 by our friend Norman Giller.
Mhm.
And in 2001, they put this masonry net in front of the superstructure because it was going to become the Carillon Resort, Canyon Ranch it was becoming. And I was actually photographing the dry cleaners across the street at the time. And I said to my client, you know, do you mind holding on just for a moment? I raced up the street, which was about 40, 50 yards away, because I saw this happening. And this is a masonry net, which stops the masonry from falling onto Collins Avenue. But this stiff wind was blowing south down Collins Avenue. And I said, okay, I have to shoot this thing. It's completely unique. And I took this photograph, and it's become one of my better known photographs. But a friend of mine, who's a very interesting, lovely guy, Luis Pons, who's a wonderful designer, he took this idea and he created one of his hotels with this in mind. So I like the concept of flow and what that represents.
And I also love the idea of it just moving up, like ascending, you know, when I see it, that's what and who is this? Who is this?
This is Sir Eric of Braithwaite. So a few years ago, as part of my shaman journey, I spontaneously started designing an oracle deck of cards. And the whole thing, this is actually a photograph. And the way this happened is a friend of mine, her name is Zan, and she's a poet, and she wanted me to illustrate her book. And I said, okay, what's it about? And she says it's about suffering, and it's about relationships, and it's about nature. I says, oh, there's a lot of different things there. And she says, well, I'd like you to try and illustrate it. I said, great. So what I did, I went to the garden and I gathered all this sort of organic material, and that's a magnifying glass that works as the glasses. But there was a magic moment that happened because I had it on top of a glass table and I was moving the organic matter around. And it kind of looked interesting. And then I said, I got to dive underneath the table. So this is photographed from underneath the table. At the same time, the studio filled with an aura of this being. And he told me his name. He said, I might look like Eric Clapton, but really my name is Sir Eric of Braithwaite, and I'm the light magician.
Wow.
I'm like, what is going on here? You know, quiet mind again, you know, listening to spirit. This is another character that came through. His name is John the Templeton, and he is the Holy One. And he's very close to, you might be able to see some, the Shroud of Turin there a little bit. It's very much a Christ-like piece of work, you know.
Let's see that.
So this is part of an oracle deck of cards that I use for readings.
Robin, you're always on an adventure, aren't you? It seems to me that every photo for you is some kind of an adventure, some kind of an experience where you just kind of leave behind this world and you go into something higher, something deeper. It's really interesting to get to interview you, and I wish we had more time. I think
Thank you, Meredith.
Been going for a long time, but I can imagine that people are just more and more drawn to what you're doing because they feel something as a result of your work.
Thank you.
You feel, and then you know that we do need these experiences today. We can't just look at a picture, a painting, or a photograph and say, oh, that's very nice. It has to speak to us
Yeah,
It's
there's a resonance of frequency, and sometimes when you understand the story behind something as well, because we're human beings and we understand narrative, and story is the way that we understand ourselves. It's through story that you can kind of really make that bridge, you know, the connection between mind and spirit.
Wow, that's to me what it's all about.
Yeah,
And I loved reading about you and where it said that you really didn't know earlier in life what you were going to do. And I just
That's
wanted
right.
to end on this.
Yeah.
You didn't know you were interested in photography, but you had no idea, you know, how. And you were hitchhiking through
That's
London,
right? Yeah.
right? And you could tell the story a lot better than me, but maybe I'll just tell this part. And you got in a car with somebody and he started to talk with you about photography, and that changed your life, right? That was a life-changing moment. Where
it was, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the gentleman that picked me up, his name is Dodd Miller, and he's a really wonderful photojournalist. It was purely synchronicity, you know, because what's the chances of a guy picking you up to take you to London to become a photographer and in being a photographer, you know? It was just, you got to listen when those things are happening, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, listen and follow through, right? I mean, I do
Right.
think in a way we're always getting messages, do this, do that internally, but do we follow through with the ones that, you know, we're really resonating with? We could talk all day, Robin. I could see that. Yeah, I don't want to take any more of your time, but this was just absolutely fascinating. And
God bless
thank you so much
God bless you
for joining us. Yes, on Conversations with Friends. So you are our new friend here. You're a wonderful friend, very, very special, super talented, spiritual individual. Good to be with you.
God bless you.
Thanks everybody for joining us. And I thank Nita Saxena from the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center, who is the technical director on this program, among many, many other programs and events happening at the center, among other things that she does. So again, join us. There's so much going on at the Brahma Kumaris Center in Coral Gables, and you can just look it up, Brahma Kumaris Miami, on Facebook or YouTube, and you can learn a lot about the activities that are happening at the center. Thank you so much, and Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.